One of the things that bugged me a lot on PI is that I'd get the animation looking nice and snappy in the viewports, but once I rendered it out, the motion blur would smooth it out so much that the animation would lose a lot of its pop. So I've been trying to come up with a few tools that would help make the OpenGL displays look more like the rendered output. The first one is just a 3D version of the smear blur that 2D animators use. Since you can't do motion blur in 2D, on really fast moves, they'll sometimes stretch the shape of a character to help it feel more smooth and loose. The way I transitioned this into 3D is to build a deformer that can figure out where each vertex was in the previous frame, and then it uses a cutoff to figure out whether the vertex is on the leading edge or the trailing edge of the movement. You want to keep a strong leading edge on the smear so that the form is still distinct, but the back part of the geometry will get smeared back in time. If you wanted, you could also add a little tiny bit of motion blur to smooth it out, but the whole point is letting the animator control things and doing away with motion blur entirely. Plus, all those weird little geometry problems actually look a lot like the dry brush effect that 2D guys will sometimes put on their smears, so I actually like that it's not all perfect and clean, and it gives a nice little extra bit of motion and force to the smear. Unfortunately, I didn't figure this out until PI was almost finished, so it doesn't show up in the final film, but the next time around I really want to push the animation and exaggerate things a lot more, so this will be a key part of that look. Another tool I've been working on is still really rough, and to be honest, I'm not sure I have the coding skills to really do it right, but the gist of it is that it makes several copies of your geometry and then makes them all slightly transparent. So it's a lot like motion blur in After Effects, not the highest quality, but the animator can at least see exactly what the motion blur is doing to their animation. And then at render time, those extra models get thrown away and the real motion blur should be pretty much identical to this. Now of course it's also tied into the camera settings, so if the animator wants, they can animate the shutter speed and adjust things to fit their animation, and then those settings will get carried through to the final render. So as I mentioned, that particular tool is still really rough, but the smear tool works great, so if you happen to be an XSI user, I have uploaded the ice compound to the blog, so be sure to check that out. And I also want to thank FXPHD for sponsoring this episode. It actually takes a lot more work than you would imagine to put on even a very short podcast like this, so having them come on board as a sponsor will help get these podcasts out more regularly and also for a lot more episodes than I had previously planned. So if you haven't heard of FXPHD, they are a visual effects training site, and currently I'm actually teaching my second XSI class through there. So they've got a great bunch of professors, a great community. Be sure to check them out, and I will see you next week.